Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Well, recently, the American Principles Project released a report condemning the House's apparent attack on faith-based institutions of higher education. It's true. Among the key findings of the report is that almost 70% of the penalties imposed by the Office of Enforcement have been against Christian institutions and career colleges, even though these schools represent less than 10% of all college kids in America. Something's up, right? Other discoveries are that the White House issued record fines on two of the nation's most prominent Christian universities, Grand Canyon University in Arizona at $37.7 million and Liberty University at $14 million. No doubt that actions taken by the Biden-Harris administration constitute a destructive brand of woke authoritarianism. Here with me to discuss this further is a campus reform higher education fellow and professor of political science at Suffolk Community College in New York, Nick Giordano. Professor, nice to see you. Look, I mean, if 70% of the fines are going to 10% of the schools, I mean, I'm no mathematician, but it seems out of whack. Seems that ratio just isn't right. What do you make of it?
Well, it certainly isn't right. And at the Leadership Institute's campus forum, you also have to look at the size of the fines. So Christian universities are being penalized and fined approximately $815,000 on average, whereas secular institutions are being fined at approximately $228,000 on average. So you're seeing fines that are 3 times higher against Christian institutions than the public secular institutions. And listen, at Campus Forum, we're documenting and reporting that on the war on Christians, that this administration has unleashed on the American people. And it's an affront to everything that we stand for as a nation, the idea of religious liberty that so many from around the world have come here for. This administration is now making a mockery of it and giving a license to discriminate. But the intention is clear, because Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona has publicly stated that he'd like to see these institutions shut down, that he doesn't want them to exist, that they go against the woke leftist ideology that they want to push on a student body and brainwash them with. It goes far beyond just the educational institutions, though, and I think this is what every American needs to be concerned about. It goes beyond the Department of Education, because we saw with the FBI when they released the anti-Catholic Richmond product that stated that Catholics are potentially domestic violent extremists, all because they believe in 2 genders, because they may be pro-life, because they may go against the idea of the leftist ideology and support something like the traditional nuclear family. So it's not just about education. It's about where we are as a society and who we are as the American people. If you could destroy faith within our country, it's the state that is the highest authority. The state is the highest entity, and that's what the Biden administration wants.
Sure. You know, and you made me think about a brand new book from Kevin Roberts at the Heritage Foundation. Nails every one of these points. If you guys need a new book to read, I'm telling you, this is the one you want. Kevin Roberts talks about the destruction of the American family. And again, this is all by design, Professor. Undermine the family. Undermine the foundational principles of America. Undermine all of these things, and you can usher in a golden age of socialism, or whatever it is I think they can deliver for us. But it's a false promise. I mean, look around. It never works. And attacking people of faith generally backfires over time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it ultimately does, because faith will always prevail over the state apparatus. But the problem that we see today is the administration is dumping so many tax dollars into leftist ideology that's going to these university systems. At Campus Forum, we've been reporting, $50,000 on studying white supremacist extremists. You have $4.5 million going to equity centers at LSU, $1 million going to redesign biology biology classes so that they go beyond the idea that there's two genders, male and female out there, and you're born with these genders. So we see this heavy amount of taxpayer dollars being used to try and shift the mindset of the American people. Now, hopefully the American people begin to stand up and push back. It is our responsibility. But I also think that Congress needs to quickly investigate this, and Congress needs to penalize the Department of Education itself for abusing its powers.
The dishonesty, Professor, and I want to dig into that a little bit. You talk about white supremacy and all of this nonsense. White supremacy, does it exist in America? A little tiny bit. I'm going to go back to the late 1990s, early 2000s. I was working for another network and was asked to go dig into the Ku Klux Klan in Ohio, which I did. And so I went to the now completely discredited Southern Poverty Law Center, right? Completely discredited organization, but these universities on the left will still cite them as being some sort of an expert on hate groups in America. But the truth is, in the year 2000, they couldn't find 10,000 members of the Ku Klux Klan in America. Couldn't find 10,000 in all these little splinter groups. And you're trying to tell me, or they're trying to tell us, or they're trying to tell our kids that are in college, oh my God, white supremacy has erupted. It's bloomed like never before. That is complete hogwash, isn't it?
It is. And if you look in the 1920s, we were a country of 129 million people. There were 4 million members of the Ku Klux Klan. Many of these members served in high-level positions like judges, lawyers, politicians, police chiefs. Today, as of today, the estimates are between 4,000 to 6,500 in a country of 350 million people. We are the most open and tolerant society that has ever existed, and we figured out a way to make it work.
You're exactly right. I want to circle that. America is the most diverse major country in the world. Look at China. How diverse are they? Look at India. How diverse are they? Or Vietnam, or any of the other countries that have over 100 million people. America has 350 million people from all corners of the earth. More languages, more religions, more great food. I'm not going to lie to you. I like it a lot. We are a diverse nation, Professor. We should be proud of it, not tearing ourselves down.
I don't know. Italy has pretty good food, too. So, we have to bring that up. We have to give them the credit where it's due. But when we look at this, I mean, let's be honest. Christianity, we are a Judeo-Christian society. It doesn't mean that we impose our religious beliefs on everyone else. But the idea is that you don't target people for religious beliefs. And that's exactly what the Biden administration is doing. They are cutting off financial aid to these students at these institutions to try and bankrupt them and close them down. And that's why campus reform is highlighting this for the American people.
And we appreciate everything that campus reform is doing. We appreciate what you're doing, Professor. Look, it's important work. And Grand Canyon University and Liberty should not be getting punished because they're institutions of faith. I'll give you the last word.
And I say everyone should also view this through the perspective of what we witnessed on the Ivy League campuses, where you have Jewish students that are being openly targeted and assaulted and harassed. And where's the Department of Education's Office of Enforcement on those college campuses? Where are the fines being levied on those college campuses? You don't see it, and it's because this administration doesn't care.
That's because they get a pass. That's exactly right. Professor, greatly appreciate you being here as always, my friend. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back to the program. Less than a month before President-elect Donald Trump takes office, colleges are starting to cut their DEI programs and close down their so-called cultural centers nationwide. And I think that's a good thing. So I want to ask our friend Professor Nicholas Giordano, who's a professor of political science at Suffolk Community College, host of the P.A.S. Report podcast, and a fellow at Campus Reform's Higher Education Fellowship. Professor Giordano, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Lars. Always a pleasure to join you, and we could at least be optimistic about the higher education system heading into 2025.
Yeah, Trump hasn't even arrived, isn't going to for a little over a month, about a month and 10 days, and yet the colleges are starting to shut some of these programs down. Have they realized that the writing is on the wall, or is there another reason they're doing that?
Well, there's several reasons. The writing's on the wall, but they also realize that DEI is a losing proposition. It doesn't make any sense. It's a toxic ideology. And at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, we just put up an article that people can check out at campusreform.org that talks about how a California accrediting agency, the Western Association of Schools, is seeking to remove all DEI-related standards. They want to shift the focus to institutional excellence and success for all students, where the focus should have been the entire time. I mean, that was the whole basis for college. And this will actually force institutions to demonstrate progress in supporting students and preparing them for once they leave the colleges. So this is good news, but it's not just California. We're seeing this across the country. For instance, the University of North Carolina has closed down 17 DEI offices and eliminated 60 DEI positions. That translates into millions of dollars that could go to cut tuition costs, to improve student learning, to catch students up from the lockdowns where students were out of school for 2 years. We're seeing movements in 30 states now that have either introduced legislation to take away the DEI standards or colleges are doing it themselves. So this is certainly good news for the American people.
I would agree with you, but Professor, one of the things that's confused me is why any intellectual, why any professor at a college would have said, yeah, I don't think it's such a good idea to catch kids up. I mean, I had to take bonehead math when I only went to college for about a year and a half, but I had to take bonehead math because my math scores were too low. Everything else was okay, but my math scores are bad. So I took math 99. And you were never that proud of telling fellow students, yeah, I'm in the math 99 class, because they knew that was bonehead math. But if it is, so what? And if you catch up by taking the bonehead courses, great. And if you don't, maybe college is not for you. How in the world did the colleges say, no, we need to go out and tell all these kids that the reason you didn't do well in algebra is because of your skin color, your gender, or how you like to dress, or what name you call yourself? Who thought that was a good idea?
Well, we have to understand that a lot of people within academia are not academics. They're actually ideologues. They're far-left ideologues that want to push an agenda. But ultimately, a college is a business, and there is a bottom line to that business. And so what have colleges seen since this big DEI push? Well, they've seen a major drop in enrollment. They've seen that the focus on race and victimhood, identity politics, well, that's why only 36% of the American people have a great deal of confidence or a lot of confidence in the higher education system. That number used to be a lot higher. They're seeing that 50% of employers have dropped 4-year degree requirements for a lot of their positions, because 91% of them say that college graduates aren't prepared for the workforce, that the colleges are doing a terrible job. So as enrollment continues to decline, as confidence in higher education declines, as employers begin to move away from the 4-year degree programs, these colleges have a choice. They either reform and make the necessary changes to adapt, or they continue what they're doing, and ultimately they will go out of business.
Well, and how was it that even the ideologues did not foresee that, I think it was Ron DeSantis who called it discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination, that we were going to get wise to this very quickly when we realized what it was they were pushing on college campuses? Even the ideologues must have realized the hazard of what they were going into, or did they?
No, I don't think they did realize. I think they got overly ambitious. I think with the coronavirus, that gave them a big push. And then the focus on the George Floyd riots that ensued following his death, I think the colleges thought that they would be able to get away with this and that the American people would simply bow down. But as tuition costs go up and the value of a 4-year degree goes down, well, nobody wants to end up $80, $90, $100,000 in the hole and unable to find a job when they graduate. I mean, let's be honest. Most people attend colleges because they want to graduate and start a career. Well, if you can't do that because employers don't like the people that are coming in, the recent college graduates, then that degree is kind of useless. And imagine paying $120,000 to have to work in some retail chain because nobody wants you because of the college you attended.
Well, and one of the things that's always bothered me, Professor, is this overemphasis on credentialism. And I guess you can call it that, where you walk in and you say, well, I came up with some new ideas. Well, do you have a PhD? No? Well, then you can't come up with new ideas. You're not allowed to do it. You have to go out and get this credential. because the credential certifies that. Now, I realize you're a college professor, so some credentials are essential for doing certain jobs. I don't want to go to a doctor that didn't go to medical school. On the other hand, the best builder in the world may not be the guy who's got a degree in material science or something like that.
Well, yes, but the one thing I will say is it's not necessarily about credentialing. I mean, if we go back 40, 50, 60 years ago, the liberal arts programs were designed to educate students and create a productive citizenry.
Yep.
If you could make it through the four-year university system, it showed that you were dedicated, that you were willing to work hard, you were willing to put the effort in. But as standards routinely dropped throughout the decades and then completely collapsed over the last 4 years, well, then it becomes a question of, well, why even go to college?
Yeah.
If we're just going to cycle students through and they graduate and only 36% of them can think critically and they can't read, they can't write, well, then what's the point of college? And I think that's where we've come. I think that's why colleges have started to realize that they need to reverse this trend because the future isn't that bright. And it gets even worse when we look at the decline in the birth rate and the future populations that are going to be enrolling in school. The numbers are going to be a lot smaller, and there's going to be a lot of competition for those students.
Yeah, and when you run somebody through 4 years of college to get an undergrad degree, and you say, I've proved that I can work through the system and fulfill all the things I'm told to do, that isn't necessarily somebody who's going to be critically thinking. And if you're told there are certain things you're not allowed to think or say, that seems like another way to clamp down on any kind of creativity. That's Nicholas Giordano. He's a professor of political science at Suffolk Community College. He's also a Campus Reform's Higher Education Fellowship. You're listening to the Lars Larson Show on a Tuesday.
Good evening, America. Welcome to the Friday edition of Just the News, No Noise. We hope you have gotten over your turkey comas and that you're probably out shopping or going through traffic trying to shop. We're going to try to make it a little bit fun today for you. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you as always from the Washington, D.C. studios of Just the News and wiredtofishcoffee.com. Wired to Fish Coffee is going to be the official coffee of Just the News. In fact, it is. And you can go right now to wiredtofishcoffee.com and get get a load of this. They just changed it today. 20% discount on all of their great blends, as well as some really great items. They got coffee decorations for your tree. They've got new coffee cups, and of course, my favorite, the Just the News tumbler. Go check it out. 20%. If you can't remember that, all you got to do is point your camera at that QR code, and they'll take you right to the offers. All right, Amanda, what a Thanksgiving we had. My family was so blessed. I want to bring you and ask, how was your Thanksgiving, and what's on your headlines tonight?
It was great. I'm still a little sleepy from all the eating, and as soon as we get done with the show, I'm going to go and eat some more leftovers. But tonight, for this hour, we're going to be speaking about something that is very, very important to our country, higher education and what we can do to save it and stop the indoctrination of America's kids into hating their own country, which unfortunately, most of these universities have really become factories for doing that. But before we get into all of that, I want to talk a little bit about K through 12 as well, because in those grades, America really isn't a beacon either. In fact, we are severely lagging behind other developed countries in a number of those curriculum areas. And I don't think that I need to tell anyone in this country that a lot of our public schools are not serving our students well, and President Trump agrees. Hear what he said he wants to do to fix it.
And one other thing I'll be doing very early in the administration is closing up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and sending all education and education work and needs back to the states. We want them to run the education of our children because they'll do a much better job of it. You can't do worse. We spend more money per pupil by 3 times than any other nation, and yet we're absolutely at the bottom. We're one of the worst. So you can't do worse. We're going to end education coming out of Washington, D.C. We're going to close it up, all those buildings all over the place, and you have people that in many cases hate our children. We're going to send it all back to the states.
And he's right. I mean, we really are scraping the bottom of the proverbial barrel. And it doesn't seem like the Department of Education has served us particularly well since it was established under President Jimmy Carter's administration. And it seems that one half of DOJ agrees, Vivek Ramaswamy, and he's been saying that he wants to end the Department of Education for a few years now. Here he was, while he was still a presidential candidate, explaining why it is a good idea to end it.
Why we ought not have a federal Department of Education at all. Lends itself to abuse when you actually do have administrative agencies that should not exist. And that's why I've made a commitment that I'm going to shut down a lot of federal government agencies. But the first one that I've already identified is in the first few weeks on the job, I will shut down the Federal Department of Education because it has no reason to exist. When you have thousands of people working in a bureaucracy that don't actually have a purpose to serve, they find things to do instead. And you know what? Now getting money from the federal government, especially the Federal Department of Education, becomes a sort of noose tied around the strings, tied around the necks of effectively schools that have accepted that money, but then have to accept a lot of social strings attached. And a lot of the toxicity you see emerging in schools and educational institutions across the country starts actually with mandates that begin with the Department of Education.
Them's fighting words in Washington. You can imagine that there are many folks there who are not happy with this plan. And here's CNN asking Democrat Congressman Ro Khanna, and they tee up the question as if getting rid of the Department of Education would be the end of the republic. Watch.
And this weekend, Vivek Ramaswamy said that certain agencies should expect to be deleted outright as part of this project that has now with Elon Musk. One of the agencies that people are saying could potentially be deleted outright is the Department of Education. What would it look like if that happened? I mean, what do you say to that declaration from Ramaswamy?
Well, it's horrifying, and I think it doesn't understand history. First of all, look at the real-world impact that would have. It would mean kids who are getting Pell Grants to be able to go to college. That would be in jeopardy. It would mean a lot of schools, Title I schools that get federal funding, that would be in jeopardy. If you have a child who has autism or special needs, your education of your child, if they go to public school, would be in jeopardy.
I'm sorry, Ro Khanna represents California. He, of all people, should know that public education is failing. But would it be horrifying if we got rid of the Department of Education, or is the job of the Education Department doing, isn't it already horrifying? I think that you all know where I come down on that. So, John, I'm going to hand it back over to you to get to our first guest to have a lot of these important conversations tonight.
You know, for more than 200 years, the United States didn't have an education department. It did just fine. In fact, I went to school before there was an education department. I'm not illiterate, so I turned out okay. So I think a lot of people forget that it's an invention of Jimmy Carter in just the last 40 years. So, well, one of the people that we turn to every time a very important issue comes up with education, particularly higher education, we turn to our great friend, Nick Giordano. He is a campus reform higher education fellow and professor of political science at Suffolk Community College. It's always great to have him on. Nick, welcome. I want to ask, because I think you have really studied this issue a lot, what has the education department in Washington done to change the nature of learning, and why do we seem to be falling farther behind since the education department got more involved?
Well, it's because they don't focus on actual education. And what they do is they implement these federal guidelines that they advise schools to follow, and then they tie the grant funding to it to make sure that the schools do follow them. So take DEI, for instance. You know, at Campus Reform, we've done a lot of reporting when it comes to DEI funding coming out of the federal government, going to schools, pushing a narrative that forces victimhood and oppressors versus oppressed. It's a toxic ideology that seeks to divide Americans. And a lot of these schools run with it because they need the funding. So the idea that if you shut down the Department of Education is going to have a detrimental impact on the education system as a whole is fundamentally false. And as you correctly stated, it was the Office of Education prior to 1979, and you're not going to see too much of an effect. But here's the thing. The states still are in charge of curriculums. And what we've seen in kindergarten through college is this coddling of the student body, where they don't actually educate students anymore. Instead, it's guided through emotions and feelings. And it's like daycare centers from kindergarten through college. And just look at the reaction to the presidential election, where you had the University of Oregon that was offering therapy animals so that students could cope with the election results. George Washington University was offering students milk and cookies. You know, we're constantly saying that the students of today are the future leaders of tomorrow. Why aren't we treating them like that? It's really disheartening when we examine exactly what's gone wrong in higher education and the K through 12 system. And it's been a slow progression, but it's sped up over the last several years, particularly through the Department of Education.
Nick, some of those students in those woke or coddled universities have made it to the State Department because they're giving grief counseling at the State Department. We had that on with Amanda the other night. But can you believe that the State Department giving grief sections over the man who's going to be the president? They clearly went to those schools.
Well, that's why people need to pay attention, because everything that happens on college campuses ultimately bleeds out into society. I'm a professor, but I'm also a father of 2 boys that I'm trying to raise to be capable individuals who are going to contribute to our society, be good citizens, good husbands, good community members. And the schools make it really difficult to raise people that, because they don't teach about self-reliance and personal responsibilities, entity that has existed for years.
Yeah. 2 separate therapy sessions at the State Department. You're supposed to serve at the pleasure of this country. And anyway, human mind is limitless. I truly believe that. And I believe that we are sponges and we can soak up any amount of information. However, when it comes to K through 12, there is a limited amount of time that these teachers have with these students to instill knowledge in them. If they are spending time focusing on DEI and all of this garbage, indoctrinating them, that they're not spending time on the math and the science and the social studies and English and the things that they should be learning. And we see failing school systems here in California, there in New York, where you teach at Suffolk. When you have students come into your classroom, do you feel like over the years since you have been teaching that their preparation for higher education has decreased?
Absolutely. First of all, they can't even pass a basic citizenship exam. Writing standards have fallen off a cliff. Only 37% of graduating seniors can read, write, and do math at the college level. 36% of college graduates actually have critical thinking skills. And it's disheartening. And at Campus Reform, we have laid out the trajectory of how this all started. You know, it starts with the whole idea of speech codes and trigger warnings and safe spaces where disagreement on the issues is deemed as offensive, and you have to watch every little thing you say. And then it progressed into this idea of equitable grading systems, the everyone gets an A mentality, that we have to protect the self-esteem of the student body. And if everyone gets an A, no one will complain. So it makes the teacher's job and the administrator's job easier. But at the same time, it's created the false sense of achievement in the student body, where they think they're far more capable than they actually are. It's no longer based on merit. Now it's based on mediocrity and what's the complexion of your skin color? What gender do you subscribe to? And so standards have completely collapsed throughout the education system. And then you factor in the groupthink mentality. College campuses, and we reported at Campus Reform about bias reporting systems, where students are able to pretty much complain against professors and other students for things that they find offensive. So they get to basically turn our college campuses into a bunch of narcs, hall monitors, where they're going to sit there and accuse other students and other professors of being insulting. And it's more reminiscent of what you see in authoritarian societies, where only one narrative can prevail. And finally, it culminates in the whole DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, degree requirements that pushes this victimhood mentality. It pushes the entitlement, the sense of entitlement, that you don't have to work hard in order to achieve, because the whole idea of equity is we're going to get to equal outcomes, not equality of opportunity, but we want to see equal outcomes. And the real world effect is a less competent workforce that we're witnessing. I don't know if your audience is aware, but we are losing billions of dollars each year in productivity because a new cohort of recent graduates can't write. Companies are shelling out $3.1 billion per year in order to bring in remedial writing teachers because of information that students did not learn in high school and college. That's something that should be unacceptable. You have 68% of small business owners that say that the new generation is the most toxic to work with, that they don't know how to interact with their colleagues. 26% of Gen Zers brought a parent to a job interview. I mean, I would have been mortified if a parent came with me to a job interview when I was younger. Now, these people are willing to bring their parents. So it shows that the coddling of the mind has real world effects, and it has an impact on every aspect of our life, whether we have children in college or we don't, it's still impactful.
Yeah, those are just amazing statistics. Nick, real quickly, we only got about a minute left. Education department goes away. Do you just take some of the money, make it block grants, make the states empowered, and get rid of the bureaucracy? Is that sort of the simple game plan?
Absolutely. I think that would be the game plan. And I don't think that necessarily the Department of Education may go away, but I still think that there'll be an Office of Education. There'll still be Pell Grants that are going to be going on. Students will still be able to apply for financial aid. Schools and districts will still be able to receive federal funding. It's just not going to have all the bureaucratic nonsense attached to it. And it will go out as block grants, and let the states decide how best to spend that money.
What a great moment of common sense should that happen. And by the way, every time we come to campus reform, and specifically to you, Nick, we get a healthy dose of common sense. That's why we're a lot smarter than some of those kids that have been turned out by the, weeping factories of schools. Great to have you on today, my friend. Really, what a great conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, we always have a fun time when we're with Nick.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.